Ever since he had taken up this way, things had changed. It was difficult to say precisely how or what this had brought him, but he knew they had. So then, he had cast away some worthless notions and become newly open to others. He uttered words he did not mean and was secretly pleased he had said them. He offered less, took more. He was not flat-footed any longer, but threw himself into the dance. Of course, Arzee was still small. That he could never do anything about. But he wanted people to always find themselves up against that thought "but" when they thought of him. In sum and record, Arzee had spread himself wider, wider, wider. He had been too predictable earlier, too submissive, a soft touch. Each day in the world was a battle against the might and will of myriad forces. So then, why shouldn't he change track and direction just as it suited him? A man couldn't just be as he was, as he felt he should be. This world wasn't a place for feelings. Instead, he had to figure out what his situation was and then set himself up to deal with that, to hold his own, just as plants couldn't grow unless they turned their heads towards the sun. He saw how, being ignorant of these primary truths about life, and being so straight and simple and not keeping anything in reserve, he had been a fool in the past, and naturally he had received a fool's return. If he so much as lent out a cigarette now, he'd make a mental note of that. The world was on credit when dealing with him. There was plenty it had to pay back. Had it struck anyone how much he had changed? Arzee wasn't sure. People were so caught up with themselves that they kept telling their own histories in the minutest detail, but at the same time they were oblivious to major movements in others. Or if they did notice a change, they hankered after the old person who had now vanished, not respecting the laws of age, time, and motion. But that wasn't possible anymore. Earlier, he might have admitted their claims, but not anymore. They weren't in charge of who he was. He was. For a long time, he had nursed his wounds in a small heart that simmered with rage and bitterness, but now he was back to moving forward, to looking forward. In the wake and aftermath of that matter he tried not to think about anymore, he had emerged not weaker, but stronger. Stronger. Why? In some ways, he had only been a boy before. So that's the first chapter, and it shows us, or what I was trying to do here was to develop a kind of very short backstory of this character whom we're going to meet in action from the next part on, and to suggest that maybe at some point he was a softer man than he is now. He feels that in order to deal with the world he has to be a harder soul than he normally is, because otherwise it's an unforgiving place and it's not going to give him the deal that he wants. So I'm going to read a bit more. I'm going to read a bit about Firoz, who's this other projectionist who works in the Noor cinema, and we see Arzee on a day in his life when he has some news and he's telling his friends this news, his closest friends in the world, and this is the news. Firoz Ke Peer was retiring. After more than 30 years as head projectionist of the Noor cinema, old Firoz was going to call it a day and pass on the custody of the projection room and the barber to his deputy. Yes, the end credits were soon going to be rolling on Firoz Bhai's career, with the names of his mother and father, his employers, his friends and assistants, his late wife, and the cinema dog Tyson. The strange thing was, there was no special reason for Firoz to retire now. As he was already past 70 and not significantly better or worse off than 5 years ago, he might as well have carried on till the call came for him from above to quit not just the Noor, but this world altogether, and his soul was projected into the heavens on a beam like the one that arrowed across the Noor. But Arzee saw how there must come a point in a man's life when he realizes that he has run his course. He need go on no longer, and now his life will actually run in reverse, as he puts his feet up and thinks about the old times, about all the departed ones who had once held taut his days. And so Firoz Bhai, who had been in show business from the time his hair was thick and dark, and the movies only blacks and whites and greys. Why don't you sit down if you want to? There's plenty of room up here.
Okay, thank you.
And so Firoz Bhai, who had been in show business from the time his hair was thick and dark, and the movies only blacks and whites and greys, and the heroines in the movies so demure and chaste, had decided voluntarily to take his leave of the crumbling but still grand empire of the Noor. It was hard to believe that very soon Firoz's thick-set, forward-bent figure, a jute bag on one shoulder, the lips mumbling what only the ears could hear, would no longer be seen entering and leaving the cinema at exactly the same hours each day. Hard to imagine that his balding and professorial head, the oblong cranium nearly bare except for 2 strips of hair above each ear the size of combs, would no longer be seen sticking out of the window on the top floor as he studied the color of the sky between reels, or tossed grain to the pigeons doing skips and turns on the windowsill. But that was how it was, how it was going to be. It was now the age of Arzee. Of course, Firoz could still come and visit whenever he liked. So that's Arzee now thinking about this new day in his life, and it seems like a big opportunity has opened for him. And one of the things I wanted to do in this book was to